anything less than self-administered, pre-programmed, automated, although initiated manually, it cannot function. Since potentiality is mass itself, repetitious input would work to oppose accumulation to elite displacements, dragging as it were mass behind it exponentially like a ball to a chain. The input-to-output scheme would then have to be systematically altered to divorce itself from repetitious input via manual inducement unto repetitious input. Omitting repeats in input-to-output exclude it. If done via automatic positive feedback, the initiation of it, manually begun, would have the issue of partiality, since feedback loops take a portion of the output and feed it back into the input, and this therefore is a repetition, which conflicts with omitting repetitious input of any sort to produce a satisfactory output absent of mass opposing energy in the opposite direction to the direction of travel by potentiality, which is the mass itself. Indication has it that mass coupled or backed by manually driven energy is the source behind or cause of all repetitious displacement. Whether this displacement is inductive of repetitious input unto hierarchical repetition forming spheres equidistantly from the axis, mass causes repletion regardless of external input. Therefore, estimating this, the absence of repletion as any level, whether to establish motion or no, would then suggest that removal of repeating is the key to liberating energy from mass, even if dimitically in the energy spectrum, since energy is the only thing which is dimitic. Since the opposite of repetition is instance, this indicates that the control lies in the very establishment of a repetition when applied energy to transfers to a mass to establish repetitious input to produce the output of what displacement appears to do rather than what is actually happening. This, in effect, would mean that during input of energy to a mass from an external source also having energy to push or pull or both, a repeat input required in replacing energy back into the system to evade the natural equilibrium the mass has to return back to rest. The input itself must be rapid enough to evade or inhibit the tendency to return to equilibrium to initially disable the opportunity for the mass to return to equilibrium by the input disengaging it, evading the requirement for the energy transfer to input again when the mass acts to naturally return to equilibrium by the first input. The secondary input is required because mass is weighted to return to equilibrium, requiring energy to be put in again to continue displacement either by pushing or pulling. 6. Amend/conclusion. My conclusions on the topic is that to travel the vast distance of space, mass for a craft and its occupants would have to remain at absolute zero with accumulation to a specified velocity. Space can in no sense be warpable, since there is nothing there to grasp in the first place, a void. While I have been unable to deduce exactly how to implement this, I have a backburner theory that it is related to a language akin to any previously known. While Edward Snowden has indicated a shadow government, it is not too far from truth now to suspect that science too has misaligned truth to cover up secondary projects. Recent findings. Much of my research over the past 24 years has been written out and transferred here. I don't think it would be wise to publish this information since no one will actually believe it without a thorough investigation. The systems today are incomplete. Many of the sciences try to solve the problem of mass being halted by P as something which may be accomplished through a push system devoid of any pull system. This basically is the solution. No push system will overcome mass and keep the opposition of P to K at zero in accumulation to a velocity, nor in any unequivalent oscillation. Only a push in one D along with a pull system will enable mass retain an equilibrium state wherewith it can supersede previously unascertainable velocities. The only problem left in this is what exactly would do just this. I have yet to uncover it, and such disinformation and debunks are out there it is difficult to lay claim to what it might be that can perpetuate this paper for the automation, or aleodeological transport as I hear to coin. Second, is some information with respect to the Delta T antenna. Initially I understood that it will take more than probability to overcome the obstacles involved in starship travel and exploring galaxies, to a level akin to fiction or phrenology, or even to begin it. The antenna and some of the related footage I reviewed on the tour of the Martel base did in fact reveal that something strange was actually going on there. But with various indications I got an epiphany that suggested that to do these as well as time travel, etc., it would involve conscious interactions. That is through thought amplification and transmittal of those into actual reality. Like at the Martel Project Seed. The concept is phenomenal, and it gave me clues to how the aliens might have done it themselves. They too apparently were stumped on space and time travel, with no real solutions, until they understood it had to be through acts of creation. When you understand this idea, you'll begin to see how by creating it via the thought amplification process, it could in essence could be possible. The antenna, perhaps, is just one piece of that total puzzle, but supposedly the aliens built a centralized chair driving thought through the chair, into a thought amplification system transmitting it into reality. That is how they did it to achieve the technologies to move about through space and time. Perhaps from here reverse engineering took place and the system was intermingled or used to advance their society. Naturally this would have drawback as well as benefits, and would have to be carefully used. My favoritism in both these discoveries would be the second one, since after I realized it, it gave me an insight into Star Trek TOS as I watched it in conjunction with how such technology might be applicable in such a potential future, how it all might work. Even though the ship and her crew encountered alien unknowns, and through the use of the chair could wipe out an enemy with the flick of the switch, the crew rather dealt with the problems, unless the seat was needed in dire cases. Now the only problem left is to develop a system or axioms which can provide insight into the extrapolation of the necessary information to piece the puzzle together for the goal. Perhaps not necessarily mathematical, nor necessarily linguistic, but perhaps a language which might enable its user to acquire the information rather than spending millennia on research. Like getting the precise information about particles, and what exactly they are, and getting the right information back. This might be with the bounds of probability and statistics absent of the energy manual input to output scheme analogously, but it may go much deeper or even beyond that, since uncertainty plays such a big role it is culminating. Phase conjugate ring and sphere solution to intergalactic transport. A review of Aleodeology. B. I investigated several methodologies and concepts in hopes of bringing about interstellar transport and its various spin-offs. Let us here review that concept which will lead into the fore description of how this can be accomplished after more than years of research, aka automation of mass, and or their subsequent spin-offs. See, Aleodeology has to do with travel, if one can call it that, between positions by going back to the exact time in which one left, but in a new position or outcome. That is, in T1, the instant or static instant in time for energy to manifest, for DF1 asterisk, degree of freedom 1, DF2, etc. Let us imagine a stationary photon, and that we fill up all df. All outcomes backward and forward equidistantly, with the same photon at row 1, position or place 1, at the same time, or before. We unify them all in all possible outcomes at T1 within the available df for the photon. D. The idea here would be that once all outcomes occupy all possible df at T1 at row 1, they could all then be gyrated in multiple df. That is to mean reciprocating 2df as opposed to reciprocating 1df asterisk, where a light ring is moved through all possible combinations and permutations of a sphere. Initially, this is comparable to simultaneity, where causality is violated. Asterisk a 360-degree light ring, rotating through a circumferential distance, can only do so in 1D, one direction, or 1df, 1 degree of freedom. The ring itself may be moved and occupy in its rotation all combinations and permutations of a sphere, but only in one direction. If the occupancy of the opposing directions are to be utilized, the rotation of the ring must come to a halt and traverse in the opposing direction to the direction it previously rotated through, and then it can occupy its opposite directions, or be turned completely around. It cannot, in a normal space environment, occupy both directions and both combinations and permutations of the ring's rotation and the movement of it through a sphere, which would be simultaneity. E. This is remedied by a phase conjugate light ring, or field, which travels in the opposing direction and merging the two. F. The construct of the two opposing fields, properly modulated and tuned, should then be free to be able to be moved through or about a sphere equidistant from the center of its imaginary axis, the center of the ring. G. The general concept here is either an interior or exterior field for a craft, bubblization, or forming these fields about a mass of, say, the shape of a person or, say, a cedar block. Continuing on, we then review, the field can do this because it is the same field, in the now, but can only be done in one direction. Displacement from df1 to another, df, now becomes easy because with this newfound freedom via asterisk time travel, asterisk that is to mean time travel at the same time, leaving and arriving in the same space, the intervening distance between the two is eliminated, and if I were in it, I could go into any one of them dimensionally. Asterisk note. Tytler's infinite cylinder does not do this. It winds through space, goes back through time to the past, comes back from the past to the future of the now. Its aura field could be assumed to leave and arrive at the same time. However, it does not do this. If it did, it would leave and arrive in the same space at the same time, and that would require time travel of a different sort. For the reader, this may be difficult to envision, but just imagine it as taking multiple exposures of an object in all possible degrees of freedom three-dimensionally, all angles equidistantly. That said, a body would then take up all possible outcomes at space 1 by continually arriving to T1 in that space. In other words, we are only arriving at the same time we left. These are all one space, cross-sectioned at the precise center of the first face, that is a relative view from the front, as opposed to moving off to another view to the side, in the Cartesian coordinate system. Now what of two or more beams of equal measurement and equal distance apart? B of C, df1 and df2? D, asterisk a degree of freedom may be defined as an outcome that occurs in an instant of time. F, separate. G, are they both united? H, indeed they are, in the same time, T1. the F3, the F4, the F5. To T1, travel would be instant by T1 no matter how far the distance. J. Diverse photons can exist simultaneously in multiple DFI time travel. Sent back to a different DF photon exists in DF1 at T1, while photon B sent back to T1 is in DF2. Both exist in T1 in DF1 and DF2, not or. The DF between the two does not therefore exist. The two become one only that the outcomes are different in T1. As an analogy, this is similar to dice becoming merged for a single result where 5 or 9 become 5 and 9. L. Coordinates M. This is the general concept of Aleodeology. N. That is, to purpose travel by time travel without having to go very far back through time and arrive at the destination in the past where light originates, as it takes millions of years for light to travel to reach our atmosphere depending on the distance. Oh, in more direct terms, we travel by going back to the same time in a different space, through the utilization of the phase conjugate field, or ring. P. As odd as this approach may appear, it does work and properly implemented can cause other things to move as if directed by magical means. Its simple and minuscule requirement for time traversal is only that we move back to the same time in which we left to move superluminally or teleportatically. 3. Exhaustive logic combined with detailed writings in my moleskin have led me back to the original thought which I had disregarded. This came in the formula that the input being manually driven does cause repetitious output against the opposition of PE. Both E and PE are interdependent, and mass is in fact the source of gravity. No external mysterious force actually exists. If we assume that the input caused by external source B causes body 1 to displace A, the energy transfer results in the output of motion in the form of V or change in V. Now V is the resistance in the form of the mass's opposition to itself as it would be with a regulation valve to hinder superluminal transport. Thus, source is repetitious to maintain the definition of uniform displacement or change in displacement with more input of power from the source against V or PE. Otherwise, however negligible, V would dominate and the mass would naturally succumb to it upon any disengagement of input from source as well as below a specific power threshold. If we assume that irrespective of these facts, that the geometric differential between input to output from source which results in repetitious input to evade fallback to V and non-motion is slight and not instantaneous, then it should be feasible to suggest that in order to overcome this the input necessitates that it first be prearranged to be faster than the output to overcome repetitious input from source. This may be interpreted as a source which is not manually established, perhaps self-communicative and automatic. This would indicate that the source itself is repetitious, because it too avoids the fallback. Not a feedback loop, but something different of which I have not yet identified and as of yet am still seeking out. This, however, is the means through which overcoming the hindrances associated with mass in V/P may be manipulated and overcome onto superluminal travel. Photokinetic constructs. Light construct, it is, of course, most impossible to think that mass itself can harbor any feasible means through which interstellar transport can reasonably be accomplished. The more you think about it, the more you try, it almost always comes up cold. However, if we turn our attention to light itself and imagine a thing in the form of light, say for instance a cell phone made entirely from light, we can begin to see that mass is not a solution to space travel, much less teleportation as it would be in fiction. These are what I term as photokinetic constructs or light constructs. To literally build a complete object made out of light which behaves and even simulates a body having the same properties as a mass to do so. Light itself would have to be able to either self-communicate and or time travel or both. Even if by a few quantum seconds into the past, and then back to the present. This concept has far-reaching implications, and is far ahead of its time. More research is needed too. I have contemplated this subject from every angle. From revolving photons, head to tail knot around it, how they might mingle, phase conjugation, enabling stopping through some information source or signaling, but to no avail. My conclusion on this is that intention for the photon to be stationary in space, in order to enable the building of constructs. The only way to do this is only if the photon itself is time-travetic. There are two ways. The first is leaving and arriving in the same space, and the second in a different space, not too distant from where it left, aleatorologically. This is the key. 3. Science has invented probabilities. Potentiality keys into this, but dependency upon it is then one is always defeated, just like gambling. If we investigate every available energy form and information, whether it is known or unknown, we come to the conclusion that it is mass that causes degrees of freedom, df, through its own interdependency with potentiality, p, which of course is energy. It is the only reason why gravity is, and not any as yet to be identified, everywhere force. That was a mistake. Remove mass, and this constraint is taken out of the way, but not via obliteration. Potentiality differs from scientific definition, is the solution to FTL, teleportation and many spin-offs. Mass hinders such goals, because it relates to energy, and while negative energies borrow against E and M, when manually driven, these two borrow to incorporate on the secret so well hidden for so long. Mass therefore cannot be involved when potentialities are involved unto FTL and the like. Established, or interdependency results. M equals df equals E equals G. This too has drawn upon blanks. Perhaps I missed something in my earlier notes, seeing that E and P are one and the same. Mass this would require an output, which loops 100% input is applicable. However, the output should loop back to alter the input, which would normally be repetitions. While the above solutions may appear applicable, they all come back to flags and blanks. Negative energy cannot do it because both P and E are interdependent and inseparable. The other potential methods are impossible aspirations. The reasonable way is via automation. That is to mean the source itself must be automatic and not dependent upon manual input, resulting in repetitious output. This could in fact be a language, or self-communicating energy, perhaps pre-programmed. It is as of yet not uncovered. Magneticus can be said to be automatic, as would be other processes such as those seen in sci-fi when Kirk beams down. The transport hints at automation. This is not like automation as it would be with